What kind of neighbor calls the cops over a jet ski on a private lake? The sun hung low over the rolling hills of my Texas ranch, casting a golden sheen across the water. I revved the jet ski, its engine roaring like a wild stallion, and carved through the lake's surface, spray fanning out behind me. The wind whipped my hair, and for a moment, it was just me, the water, and freedom. Then I saw her, Karen, standing on the shore, arms crossed, her face a storm cloud of disapproval. Her voice sliced through the air, shrill and commanding, as she waved her phone like a weapon. "You're disturbing the peace. I'm calling the sheriff." I cut the engine, the jet ski bobbing gently, and stared at her. Disturbing the peace? On my own land? This was my lake, my ranch, my sanctuary. I'd bought this place 3 years ago, 200 acres of sprawling fields, and a crystal-clear lake fed by a natural spring. The deed was ironclad, signed, and notarized. Yet here was Karen, queen of the HOA, acting like she owned the water itself. I climbed off the jet ski, wading ashore, my boots sinking into the muddy bank. "Karen," I said, keeping my voice steady, "this is my property. I can ride here." Her eyes narrowed, lips pursing like she'd bitten a lemon. "We'll see about that," she snapped, already dialing. I watched her, disbelief mixing with a spark of amusement. This was absurd, but I'd play along. Let her call the cops. I had nothing to hide. The ranch had been my dream since I was a kid in Houston, watching westerns and imagining wide-open spaces. I'd worked 16-hour days as a contractor, saving every penny to buy this land. The lake was the crown jewel, a place where I could fish, swim, or jet ski without a soul telling me otherwise. But Karen and her HOA cronies had other ideas. They'd moved into the new development bordering my ranch, a cluster of cookie-cutter houses with manicured lawns and a rulebook thicker than a Bible. The HOA didn't technically govern my land. My property predated their community by decades, but that didn't stop Karen from trying to enforce her will. She complained about my tractor's noise, my dog's barking, even the wildflowers I let grow along the fence line. Unsightly, she'd called them. Now, she'd set her sights on my lake. As I waited for the sheriff, I leaned against the jet ski, the water lapping at my boots. Karen stood smugly on the bank, her phone still clutched like a trophy. The air was thick with tension, the kind that hums before a storm. I could have argued with her, shouted about my rights, but something told me to stay calm. Let the truth do the talking. A distant siren wailed, growing louder as a patrol car rolled down the dirt road, kicking up dust. Deputy Ramirez stepped out, his boots crunching on the gravel. He was a stocky man with a weathered face, the kind of cop who'd seen it all. "Afternoon," he said, tipping his hat. "Got a call about a disturbance." Karen launched in her tirade before I could speak, her voice climbing higher with every word. "This man's been tearing up the lake with that obnoxious machine. It's a nuisance, a danger to the community." Ramirez raised an eyebrow, glancing at me. I shrugged, wiping sweat from my brow. "Just riding on my lake, deputy. This is my land." Ramirez asked for details, and I explained, the ranch, the lake, the deed. Karen interrupted, insisting the lake was community property and that my jet ski was lowering her property value. I almost laughed at that. Lowering her property value? Her house was worth $500,000 because it sat next to my pristine lake. Ramirez listened patiently, jotting notes, then turned to me. "You got that deed handy?" I nodded, gesturing toward the house. "In my office. Want to see it?" He followed me inside, leaving Karen fuming by the water. My office was a cluttered mess of blueprints and coffee mugs, but the deed was right where I'd left it, filed neatly in a drawer. I handed it over, the paper crisp and official. Ramirez scanned it, his lips twitching into a grin. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. He walked back to Karen, holding the deed like a winning poker hand. "Ma'am," he said, "this lake's his. Clear as day. You might want to check your own paperwork before calling us out here again." Karen's face flushed red, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. Ramirez tipped his hat, chuckling as he headed back to his car. I watched him drive off, the dust settling in his wake. and turned to Karen. "Anything else I can help you with?" She stormed off without a word, her heels sinking into the grass. But this wasn't the end. Karen wasn't the type to let a loss slide. I knew she'd come back, and I wasn't wrong. Over the next week, the HOA sent me letters, formal complaints about noise, environmental concerns, even a claim that my jet ski was scaring local wildlife. I ignored them, tossing the papers into a drawer. My deed was bulletproof, and I wasn't about to let Karen's petty crusade ruin my peace. Then came the twist, a letter from the county, not the HOA. It was a notice of a hearing, claiming my lake might be subject to public access laws. My stomach dropped. Public access? This was private property, bought and paid for. I called my lawyer, Sarah, who laughed when she heard the details. "They're grasping at straws," she said, "but we'll need to fight this. Karen's got connections at the county, and they're playing dirty." I hung up, staring out at the lake. The water sparkled under the morning sun, serene and untouched. This wasn't just about a jet ski anymore. It was about my home, my rights, and a neighbor who thought she could bully me into submission. I wasn't backing down. The county hearing was set for a Friday, giving me 10 days to prepare. I spent every evening with Sarah, poring over maps, deeds, and old property records. My ranch had been in private hands since the 1800s, passed down through generations before I bought it. The lake was never public. Not a single document suggested otherwise. Yet Karen's complaint had traction, backed by a county official named Greg Hensley, a man with a reputation for bending rules if the price was right. Sarah dug deeper and found whispers of a deal. Karen's HOA was pushing for lake access to boost their property values, and Greg was happy to help for a cut of the profits. It was a small-town conspiracy, the kind that thrives in backroom handshakes. I felt a mix of anger and betrayal. This wasn't just Karen's vendetta anymore. It was a calculated move to chip away at my land. I kept riding the jet ski, partly out of spite, partly because it cleared my head. Each morning, I'd glide across the lake, the engines hum drowning out the noise of the world. But I couldn't ignore the tension building in my chest. What if they won? What if some loophole let them turn my lake into a community playground? I'd lose the one place that felt truly mine. One evening, as I docked the jet ski, I noticed a kid watching from the fence line, a boy, maybe 10, with shaggy hair and a curious stare. He wasn't from the HOA neighborhood. His clothes were too worn, his sneakers caked with mud. "That looks fun," he called out, pointing at the jet ski. I smiled, walking over. "It is. You live around here." He nodded, gesturing vaguely toward a dirt road beyond my property. "With my grandma. She says you're in trouble for riding that." I laughed, but it stung. Even the locals were talking. "No trouble," I said. "Just some folks who don't like fun." He grinned, and I felt a flicker of warmth. Maybe this fight wasn't just for me. The day before the hearing, Sarah uncovered a bombshell, the 1970 survey map showing my lake was fed by a private spring, not a public waterway. This was gold. It proved the lake was mine, no question. But there was a catch. Greg Hensley had filed a counterclaim, citing an obscure environmental regulation that could restrict my use of the lake if it was deemed ecologically sensitive. It was a desperate move, but it could sway the county board if they bought into the eco angle. Sarah and I worked late, drafting our case, lining up every piece of evidence. I barely slept that night, my mind racing with images of Karen's smug face and Greg's greasy smile. The lake wasn't just water. It was my refuge, my proof that hard work could buy freedom. I'd be damned if I let them take it. The hearing room was a sterile box in the county courthouse, packed with HOA members in press shirts and Karen at the front, her hair pulled back like she was ready for war. I sat with Sarah, my deed and survey maps stacked neatly before us. Greg Hensley took the podium first, spinning a tale about the lake's delicate ecosystem and the reckless endangerment of my jet ski. I clenched my fists under the table, fighting the urge to shout. Karen followed, her voice dripping with fake concern for the community. "We just want what's fair," she said, her eyes flicking to me. "This man's actions affect us all." The room murmured in agreement, and I felt the weight of their stares. Sarah squeezed my arm, whispering, "Our turn." I stood, heart pounding, and walked to the podium. I wasn't a public speaker, but I knew my truth. "This is my land," I said, my voice steady. "My lake. I've got the deed, the maps, the history. This isn't about ecology or fairness. It's about a few people wanting what's mine." The room went quiet, and I saw a few heads nod. Sarah presented our evidence, each document a brick in our defense. The survey map landed like a grenade, blowing holes in Greg's eco-claims. But Karen wasn't done. She stood again, clutching a new document, a petition signed by half the HOA, demanding public access. The twist hit me like a punch. They'd rallied her neighbors, turning this into a popularity contest. I looked at Sarah, who gave me a grim nod. We had the law, but they had numbers. The hearing stretched into the afternoon, the air thick with arguments and counter-arguments. Karen's petition was a masterstroke, painting me as the greedy outsider hoarding a community resource. I could feel the board wavering, their eyes darting between our evidence and the stack of signatures. Greg leaned back in his chair, smirking like he'd already won. I wanted to wipe that look off his face, but Sarah kept me grounded, her hand steady on my arm. She cross-examined Greg, exposing gaps in his environmental claims. "Where's the study?" she asked. "Where's the data showing this lake's at risk?" Greg stammered, producing nothing but vague promises of future assessments. The board wasn't impressed, but Karen's emotional appeal, her voice cracking as she spoke of neighborhood unity, swayed them back. I felt the tide turning against us. Then came the kid from the fence line. I hadn't seen him slip into the room, but there he was, sitting in the back with an older woman I assumed was his grandma. During a break, he shuffled up to me, his eyes wide. "Mister, if they take your lake, can I still come watch you ride?" My throat tightened. This boy, who had nothing to gain, saw the lake as something special, not a bargaining chip. I ruffled his hair, promising he could visit any time. His grandma approached, her face lined with years of hard work. "Don't let them win," she whispered. "Karen's been bullying folks around here for years." That was the twist I hadn't expected. Not just a legal fight, but a community divided. Some locals, like this grandma, were rooting for me, tired of the HOA's overreach. It gave me a spark of hope, a reminder that this wasn't just my battle. Back in the hearing, Sarah called a surprise witness, a retired surveyor who'd worked on a 1970s map. He was a grizzled man named Walt, his voice gravelly but firm. He confirmed the lake's private status, dismantling Greg's claims with first-hand knowledge. The board listened closely, and I saw Karen's confidence falter. But she wasn't out yet. She produced a new angle, a photo of my jet ski wake, claiming it eroded the shoreline and threatened her property. It was a stretch, but the board asked for a recess to review her evidence. I stepped outside, the Texas heat wrapping around me like a blanket. The kid and his grandma were there, sharing a soda. "You're gonna win, right?" he asked. I forced a smile, unsure. "Doing my best, kid." That night, I couldn't sleep, replaying the hearing in my head. Karen's photo was nonsense. My jet ski couldn't cause erosion, but her theatrics were working. I walked to the lake at dawn, the water still as glass. This was worth fighting for, not just for me, but for anyone who'd ever stood up to a bully. The next morning, the hearing resumed with a new intensity. Sarah had found a flaw in Karen's petition. Half the signatures were from non-residents, friends and relatives roped in to pad the numbers. She presented this to the board, her voice sharp and confident. "This isn't a community effort," she said. "It's a manipulation." The room erupted, Karen shouting objections, Greg scrambling to defend her. I watched, heart racing, as the board chair called for order. They deliberated for an hour, the longest 60 minutes of my life. When they returned, the chair's face was unreadable. "We've reviewed the evidence," he said. "The lake is private property, as confirmed by the deed and survey. The environmental claims lack substantiation. Case dismissed." Relief flooded me, but Karen wasn't done. She stood, face red, and vowed to appeal. "This isn't over," she hissed, storming out. I looked at Sarah, who gave me a tired smile. We'd won for now. The victory should have felt sweeter, but Karen's parting words hung over me like a storm cloud. I went back to the ranch, trying to reclaim the peace I'd fought for. The lake was as beautiful as ever, its surface catching the sunset in a blaze of orange and pink. I took the jet ski out, but the thrill wasn't the same. Every ripple felt like a challenge, every splash a reminder that Karen wasn't done. Sarah warned me to stay vigilant. Appeals could drag on, and Greg's connections ran deep. I started noticing small things. A strange car parked near my gate, a drone buzzing over the lake one evening. Was it paranoia, or was Karen escalating? I installed cameras around the property, their red lights blinking in the dark. I wasn't going to let her catch me off guard. A week later, I got a call from the kids' grandma, Miss Clara. Her voice was shaky, urgent. "They're planning something," she said. I overheard Karen at the diner, talking about a protest. A protest? On my land? I thanked her and drove to the lake, my stomach churning. Sure enough, the next morning, a dozen HOA members showed up, led by Karen. They carried signs, "Save our lake," and "Stop the noise." I stood on my porch, watching them chant from the public road just beyond my fence. Karen held a megaphone, her voice booming. "This man's selfishness is ruining our community." I wanted to laugh at the absurdity, but the sight of their signs, plastered with lies about my lake, made my blood boil. I called Ramirez, who arrived with another deputy, looking exasperated. "Again?" he muttered, stepping out of his cruiser. The confrontation was electric, the air crackling with hostility. Karen's group shouted as Ramirez approached, demanding he shut down my illegal activities. I walked to the fence, my deed in hand, and faced her. "You lost, Karen. The county ruled in my favor. Go home." Her eyes flashed, and she leaned closer, her voice low so only I could hear. "You think you're untouchable? I'll make sure you regret this." It wasn't just a threat, it was personal. Ramirez dispersed the crowd, citing public disturbance, but not before Karen's megaphone blared one last time. "We'll be back." I watched them leave, my hands shaking. This wasn't about the lake anymore. It was about power, control, and Karen's need to win at all costs. That night, I sat with Miss Clara and her grandson, Tommy, on their porch. They lived in a modest house a mile from my ranch, the kind of place that hadn't seen a fresh coat of paint in years. Tommy clutched a toy jet ski, grinning as he mimicked engine noises. Miss Clara poured me coffee, her hands trembling slightly. "Karen's been after folks like us for years," she said. "She tried to find me for my garden last summer. Said it was unkempt." I listened, realizing how deep Karen's influence ran. She wasn't just targeting me. She was bullying anyone who didn't fit her vision of perfection. Tommy looked up, his eyes bright. "You're like a cowboy, mister. Fighting the bad guys." I laughed, but his words stuck with me. Maybe I was fighting for more than just my lake. Karen's next move came faster than I expected. A cease and desist letter arrived, this time from a high-priced lawyer in Austin, claiming my jet ski violated a new HOA bylaw. The bylaw was nonsense. My land wasn't under their jurisdiction, but the letter was a warning shot. They were trying to bury me in legal fees, hoping I'd cave. Sarah laughed when she saw it. "They're desperate," she said. "This won't hold up in court." But the pressure was mounting. I couldn't keep fighting forever, not with my savings already stretched thin from the ranch. I started questioning myself, wondering if the lake was worth this endless war. Then Tommy showed up at my gate, his toy jet ski in hand. "Can I see the real one?" he asked. I took him to the lake, letting him sit on the jet ski while I explained how it worked. His laughter echoed across the water, and for a moment, I remembered why I was fighting. This wasn't just about me. It was about standing up to bullies like Karen, for Tommy, for Ms. Clara, for anyone who'd ever been pushed around. The turning point came unexpectedly. A local reporter, tipped off by Ms. Clara, contacted me for an interview. I hesitated, but Sarah urged me to do it. "Let the truth out," she said. The article ran in the county paper, headlined, "Rancher Fights HOA Over Private Lake." It detailed my deed, the hearing, and Karen's campaign, painting her as the petty tyrant she was. The story spread online, shared across Texas forums, and even picked up by a national blog. Suddenly, Karen wasn't just fighting me. She was fighting public opinion. Comments flooded in, calling her out, mocking her obsession with my lake. I saw her at the gas station a few days later, her face pale as she avoided my gaze. The tide was turning, but I knew she wouldn't go down quietly. Then came a collapse. The HOA held an emergency meeting prompted by the article's fallout. Residents, fed up with Karen's overreach, demanded transparency. Sarah got wind of it through a friend in the neighborhood. Apparently, Karen's petition had been funded by Greg Hensley's brother, the developer eyeing my lake for a luxury project. The conflict of interest was blatant, and the HOA board turned on her. Greg was suspended from his county position, pending an investigation. Karen resigned as HOA president, citing personal reasons, but the truth was clear. Her empire was crumbling. I got a call from a Merez, who sounded almost gleeful. "Thought you want to know," he said. "Karen's moving, selling her house." I stood by the lake, the phone still in my hand, and let out a long breath. It was over. With Karen gone, the ranch felt lighter, like a weight had lifted off the land itself. I invited Ms. Claire and Tommy over for a barbecue, setting up tables by the lake. Tommy ran to the jet ski, begging for a ride. I strapped a life jacket on him and took him out, his squeals of joy echoing as we zipped across the water. Miss Clara watched from the shore, her smile soft but proud. "You did good," she said later, as we sat with plates of brisket. "Not just for you, but for all of us." Her words hit deep. I'd fought for my lake, but I'd also shown Tommy, and maybe others, that standing up to bullies was worth it. The lake was mine again, not just in deed, but in spirit. I started opening the ranch to locals, hosting fishing days for kids like Tommy. The lake became a gathering place, not for the HOA's elite, but for the community that had supported me. I kept the jet ski ready, letting anyone brave enough take it for a spin. The camera stayed up just in case, but the drones stopped buzzing and the strange cars vanished. Sarah dropped by one evening, bringing a bottle of whiskey to celebrate. "You're a legend now," she teased, raising a glass. I laughed, but I didn't feel like a legend. I felt like a guy who'd held onto what was his, with a little help from the right people. The article's ripple effects continued. The county launched a full investigation into Greg's dealings, uncovering a web of favors and kickbacks. He resigned before they could fire him, and the developer's plans for my lake fell apart. The HOA rewrote its bylaws, limiting its scope to the neighborhood and leaving my ranch alone. I framed the deed and hung in my office, a reminder of what I'd fought for. Every morning, I walked to the lake, its surface a mirror for the sky. It wasn't just water. It was a symbol of resilience, of standing firm when the world tries to take what's yours. As spring rolled in, the ranch bloomed with life. Wildflowers dotted the fields, the ones Karen had once called unsightly. I let them grow wilder, a quiet rebellion. Tommy became a regular, helping me fix fences or just sitting by the lake, sketching the jet ski in a notebook. He wanted to be an engineer someday, he said, to build things that made people happy. I gave him an old toolbox, promising to teach him what I knew. Miss Clara joined us when she could, her stories of the town's history weaving into our evenings. The lake wasn't just mine anymore. It was ours, a shared space for those who valued it for what it was, not what it could be sold for. I never heard from Karen again. Rumor had it she'd moved to a city, chasing a new neighborhood to control. I wish her luck in a way. She taught me something. Freedom isn't just owning land, it's defending it, not with anger, but with truth. The lake sparkled under the sun, its ripples carrying the laughter of kids, the hum of my jet ski, the quiet moments of reflection. I'd fought for this place, not because it was mine, but because it was right. And in that fight, I'd found a community, a purpose, and a kid who reminded me why it all mattered. The deed was just paper. The lake was home.